Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools, the show that investigates how DevTools go from 0 to 1. I'm joined today by Deepak Prabhakara from BoxyHQ, which is an enterprise readiness for B2B SaaS. And Deepak is the founder. Thanks so much for joining, Deepak.
Thanks, Jack. Super excited to be here and looking forward to the chat.
Could you tell us a little bit about Boxy and about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm Deepak, co-founder and CEO at BoxyHQ. So my background is, I've always been a technologist, love technology, love the intersection of, technology, product, and commercialization. And that's why, always loved startups and been through a lot of startups and started BoxyHQ last year where, we took this problem of a developer having a lot of responsibility all the way, from infrastructure to actually building the product. And of course, with the growing cybersecurity attacks, they need to start thinking about security as well fairly early on. So we went back and we thought about what does security in a box look like for developers. And that's what we do at BoxyHQ. We have building blocks that developers can pull into their code, make it more robust, compliant, and secure. So in many ways, we're like the Stripe for developer security.
That's really cool. And I can totally imagine a situation where like you're a startup, you finally get like an enterprise client, it's going through all the horrible legal work and stuff, and then you get these questions about security and suddenly it's all out of your depth. So and then Boxy can come in and solve all that for you.
Absolutely, it's obviously a very complex process, but we can simplify the technical aspects of that. We've been through this before, so we understand the playbook. The enterprise is not buying your product for the enterprise features. They're basically buying you for, especially the commoditized features. They're buying you for your core product, the core workflow or problem you're solving. So everything else is kind of fairly undifferentiated. So if you think about their common ask, it's enterprise single sign-on. That's the preferred way to get into your application. So it typically starts from there. That's why we started that as our first product. And what we realized very quickly is, startups want a more horizontal approach to it because they usually have 2, 3 of these sort of features that are asked for. Some of them are quite mandatory to get into even like a pilot or just for the enterprise to start using you. Thinking about that, our journey is also sort of positioned around that. We decided to start with startups that sell into the enterprises because that's really the first inflection point where startups start to think about security. Until then, it's usually an afterthought. But as soon as an enterprise comes into the picture, because they usually come with, a set of security questionnaires, they will question your compliance posture. What are you doing about security and compliance as a company? So when you start to think about those things, you can get those things out of the box from us, not have to worry about those commoditized pieces. Just get your team back onto working on your core product. And that's sort of our vision as well, starting with startups, but then slowly growing it into developer security needs for companies of all stages.
I can see you've got big plans on that. And one of the interesting things is that your model to kind of get your product out there is not like a SaaS where people sign up and they can log in on your website or an API. You're actually kind of giving them access to like a repo pretty much is kind of how it works.
Absolutely. We're open source, fully open source on Apache 2.0 as well. When we looked at the landscape and we looked at some of the SaaS vendors in the space, what we quickly realized is because we are so close to infrastructure, there's this classic build versus buy debate with every developer. Do I build this on my own because it's so close, so critical to what I do? Or do I go and buy something that's out there? So for us, open source was a very natural model there because that's how I as a developer have been evaluating software all my life as well. And even as a engineering leader, that was kind of pretty much how my team went about it as well. You go out there, developers don't want to talk to salespeople. That's the last thing they want to do. That was the same with me. You want to go out there, you have a specific problem in mind, and very quickly because you can try it out whether this tool solves your problem. So that's kind of the first mindset we want to get into. So how does a developer go about discovering solutions to their problems? So that's why open source for us was a very natural fit. And the second key thing there is, which is probably quite unique to us, we very quickly realized that developers will use this in very different ways in their tech stack, and that's why the open source model was very natural here. For example, we fit into the cloud native world. If you're deployed on Kubernetes, we fit into a natural client server architecture, monolith, because you can basically embed our you can embed us as a library, not just run us as a standalone service. So thinking about the diverse ways in which developers build and deploy things, for us, open source was a key way to help them on this journey.
Sounds like you've kind of gone for what developers actually want and you've kind of delivered it in the approach that works for developers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background is pretty much hands-on development as well. So I think some of the lessons from my own journey kind of helped there. And of course, also, talking to a lot of people in the space who have to deal with this, firstly, enterprise readiness problem. And then, later on, how do you kind of maintain that security and compliance in a continuous form? We're very sort of frantic about ensuring that the workflows match what, the developers who use our products are looking for.
And it sounds like you are talking to a lot of developers. Could you talk a little bit about how you've been growing and the stage that you're at?
Absolutely. We're doing, I think, three things in parallel. One is, of course, we have this exotic situation where we started the company even before we had the open source projects out there, which is quite unusual, of course. But, the validation, the strategy kind of added up quite nicely there. So because we were doing that, challenges are on three fronts. One is because everything starts with a project first, right? Before it turns into a product. So finding that sort of project community fit, who are the people out there who will use it? How do they discover us? How do we want to build this community? Where do we find them? What do they come in for? And why will they stick around? So that was kind of first sort of the challenge and the explorations around that. The second thing was, of course, building the product and in parallel finding product market fit. Because, unless we had people on the other side who had the problem, resonated with it, and kind of, our solution basically fills that hole for them. And the third one is, of course, what kind of developers do we start with? Because you of course, don't want to go and boil the ocean. Even thinking about just developers, it's a big crowd out there. So who amongst those, did we want to serve to begin with, and then kind of map out our journey from there? That's kind of the three, I would say, the three main challenges we started with and we're still dealing with. Because we started last year. So last August, we raised a seed round in October and really started building out the product and team from earlier this year, Jan. So that's meant, we've spent about close to a year in the market on the problem. So still very early days, but those are kind of our top challenges.
And you mentioned in our previous conversation that you've been doing a lot of content recently. Has that been the main way that you've been getting people into the funnel, essentially?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, very early on we realized that we're not going to have the same kind of ad budgets that SaaS companies would, because for us commercialization is intentionally delayed, because we're looking for adoption first, looking to truly create add value before we add and create value before we try to extract any value from both community and product. So we've been building a lot of content, a lot of guides targeted towards developers, using various frameworks and looking for this problem of how do I, as an example, how do I add enterprise single sign-on to this specific framework. So we've published extensive guides. We've looked at a lot of complementary open source solutions out there and then integrated with those, because that kind of gives us that initial audience that already has a framework, an authentication framework, but is missing that enterprise single sign-on piece. Authentication is already such a big challenge, right? Even with Auth0 and the big players, there's a lot of opportunity that's been left behind. And we've seen like a lot of these companies come out. So one challenge we had was, do we go deep into authentication and compete with that crowd as well? But then we quickly realized that there's a lot of good solutions out there, And by the time our customers come to us, they already have something in place. You don't want to very early on try and displace anything. It's very challenging. It's challenging enough to get them to adopt your product. If you're trying to displace something, that's even bigger challenge. It's something not worth trying. So that meant, for us, content, the long term strategy, we of course had to understand where our competitors are and what kind of keywords they're good at, so that instead of directly going and competing with them on those terms, we could look for auxiliary pieces where our content kind of brings us to the front. So we've done a lot of that work. That's been extremely challenging as well. You're trying to figure out where they are. Today we can see that the SEO challenges are huge because it's so expensive to get out there. And then organically, that means you have to be extremely good about your content. It can't be about your brand. It's got to really be about the problem, because Google is extremely good at those sort of cheeky pieces of, you try to do a competitor comparison, or you try to be exactly where your competitor is. So that's been a lot of trial and error there around content and what works well and what doesn't.
Did you do it all in-house, your content?
Yes, absolutely. So we're very specific about that, because the problem with outsourcing is, if you know specifically what to write about and how, it's very easy to outsource. But because we're targeting developers, it's very hard to find people who have that mindset. They really need to know what is being done there. So that mix of extremely technical articles, but at the same time, kind of being mixing that up with the SEO pieces is very tricky. So we have to kind of rely on our own expertise around this. So all of the content we do is in-house, directly related to a lot of the code code walkthroughs that we do. We haven't tried videos yet. That's on the pipeline. YouTube is really the second largest search engine after Google. So we do know that there's a lot of opportunity there, but that's something we haven't been able to try because of time.
YouTube is a very exciting place, I think.
Absolutely.
How have you been distributing the content that you've produced?
Places where developers usually get together, popular ones are Hacker News. Hacker News actually has worked really well for us because it lets you engage with the audience there. Of course, trying to promote your brand, but you're trying to kind of lead that discussion around what is useful out of that, either that content piece that you've produced or a question you're asking there. So Hacker News has been extremely good because it's not just about distribution, but you're also trying to get some insights. And they're quite engaged because they'll come in and talk to you about it. It's good to get the opinions as well because they're quite opinionated. You can sort of push the boundaries of the kind of controversies you want to create, which then, of course, with the intention being to lead into interesting discussions around it. So Hacker News, Dev.to has been great. It's quite new, but a lot of long form content there that works very well. Guides, especially. Reddit has been fantastic as well. Of course, the tricky thing with all this is, how do you seed your own profile? Because typically you will get blocked if you're trying to do too many promotional things. So it's a healthy mix of going out there with content that is not yours, using the discussions in all these channels quite nicely. You just ask a question, and as long as you're structuring the question well, you get a lot of engagement on the back of it. So that's kind of been our strategy around this. A bit of social media, but not so much. Twitter has been good because of the hashtags that you can kind of target. And we've also been using Twitter for sort of a bit of guerrilla marketing. We have some keyword alerts, and when they pop up, we kind of go in and try to be useful there first. But sometimes we're just throwing out BoxyHQ out there. We use a lot of memes as well. They work out quite well. Our product is called Samuel Jackson. Samuel because of the protocol. And then it's a nice play on Sam L. Jackson. So we use a lot of his memes from Pulp Fiction.
Great.
We're obviously big Pulp Fiction fans internally. So giving it a humorous way of getting your message out there.
What kind of terms are you monitoring on Twitter to kind of pop up in?
Very specific technical terms like SAML single sign-on, SAML SSO, OpenID Connect, which is quite broad. And then we kind of look at the tweet and what they're talking about. Sometimes it's not relevant, so you have to kind of look through it before it might be talking about something that's not related to you. Single sign-on itself is quite a broad term, and because we only do enterprise single sign-on, there's a lot of confusion with what we do. A lot of times prospects have approached us, but it turns out they were looking for a more generic single sign-on solution. Whereas we're very specific about what we do there, which is connect to providers like Okta, Azure Active Directory, etc. So those kind of keywords. We're trying a few tools now that promise to do this monitoring across wide range of channels, because now we do it separately on each channel. So Reddit, Hacker News, and Hacker News is more of going out there and searching for it. And of course, Twitter has been good with. We use TweetDeck, so it's quite nice to get those alerts.
So, and it's like you personally kind of would just be like, hey, I can help you on this, or
Exactly. So me and my co-founder were kind of out there, and then we post as ourselves, of course, not from the company account or anything. So the company account is more just the presence as opposed to doing too much around it. Off late, we've been trying some of those controversial thread-like discussions. We want to be seen as people before BoxyHQ, the brand. So it's predominantly been me and my co-founder kind of going out there and starting discussions, or trying to get into those threads that are interesting.
It's such an interesting topic, and it's like something I'm always on the podcast kind of searching for, is these like mythical kind of growth hacks where you can just do all this stuff. But it's like everything you're doing just sounds like you have to have a lot of expertise and a lot of willingness to put in a lot of effort and kind of grind, and just going out there and like really engaging with people.
And we're on that quest as well, right? Like, what is that viral? This one, is there a formula to it? But the reality, I think, is just consistency. So we try to do on a weekly basis, because for us, really, product and distribution, everything else is noise. And because we're far away from having a brand, not many people know about BoxyHQ yet, of course. But for us, it's like just reversing it, right? Wherever we are, people will see us, maybe we'll grab their attention, and then on the back of that, it comes back to BoxyHQ. So that's kind of been this one, right? It's a grind to kind of go there, find out, are they talking about you? Can you plug yourself in? But in what form? It's pretty much like the classic cold email outreach that you do, right? It's very tricky in the beginning, but you kind of start getting a hang of it. So yeah, I would say it's more consistency and grind than anything else. You slowly start to realize what resonates, and you can double up on those sort of things. But basically, a lot of experimentation and being in these specific places. Oh, I did forget Stack Overflow as well. Great for this sort of dev tool, because people are searching for those questions to solve those things. So you can kind of be very useful there without trying to worry about your brand or product.
Yeah, I always think like that would be an incredible way to just grow, is just sit on Stack Overflow and help people. But it's such a hard thing to do.
Absolutely. It's very time consuming as well. But I think it's super useful, because I mean the reality is that it's not your solution that's important, right? It's the problem. So for people out there, it's the problem is the key thing. So if you focus on that, then you can slowly, and you get those insights as well, right? We've made so many changes to our products on the back of even people who have not used it, who just come in or used it in the past, and say, look at it and suggest that, oh, did you think about this, or did you think about this way to look at it? So that way, it's, even though these things are time consuming, it basically is a lot of customer discovery and customer insights as well, and not just distribution. So in many ways, you're kind of getting to interact with your potential customer base on these forums. So that's the way we look at it long term. Not just about getting your content or getting your product out there, but also understanding what they're looking for, how they're looking to solve this. Helps you streamline your developer experience around your product.
That's really cool. Thanks so much for joining. It was really interesting, exciting to like kind of listen in on your journey, and I think there's very bright things ahead for Boxy. Where can people learn more about Deepak and about Boxy?
Thank you so much, Jack. It's been a pleasure. We are on BoxyHQ.com. Come in and have a look at our offerings. We've got great guides around these topics as well. We're also on Twitter at BoxyHQ, and of course, you'll find us on LinkedIn as well. And of course, the most important thing, our GitHub repository is also at BoxyHQ, where you can find all our products on an Apache 2 license.
Amazing. Thanks, Deepak. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week.